Everyone called him Crazy Tom, the homeless veteran who talked to invisible people. But that rainy Tuesday night when he jumped into a deadly fight to save a stranger from brutal attackers, something extraordinary happened. The man he saved looked into his eyes and said three words that shattered his 20 years of guilt: "I forgive you." The rain hammered against the concrete underpass of Interstate 405 in downtown Los Angeles with the relentless rhythm of a machine gun. Tom Martinez pulled his torn army surplus jacket tighter around his shoulders and shifted on the cardboard that served as his bed. The sound of rain always took him back to that monsoon season in Vietnam, 47 years ago, when everything changed forever. At 68 years old, Tom had been living under this same bridge for the past 3 years. His weathered face bore the deep lines of a man who had seen too much and carried too heavy a burden for too long. His once proud military posture had long since given way to the hunched shoulders of defeat. Gray stubble covered his hollow cheeks, and his eyes, those eyes that had once been sharp enough to spot enemy movement from 500 yards, now held the distant, haunted look of someone who had retreated deep within himself. The other homeless residents of the underpass gave Tom a wide berth. They called him Crazy Tom because he had conversations with people who weren't there. Late at night, passers-by could hear him talking animatedly to empty space, sometimes arguing, sometimes pleading, always with an intensity that made people quicken their pace and avoid eye contact. What they didn't understand was that Tom wasn't talking to hallucinations. He was talking to the ghosts of his past, to his fallen comrades from Vietnam, to his ex-wife Sarah, who had died 5 years ago, to his daughter Lisa, who had stopped taking his calls 15 years ago, after the last time he showed up at her house intoxicated and belligerent. Tonight was particularly difficult. The rain reminded him of Firebase Charlie, where Sergeant Michael Rodriguez had saved Tom's life by throwing himself on a grenade. Tom could still see Rodriguez's face in those final moments, not afraid, but somehow at peace, even knowing he was about to die. Rodriguez had a wife and 2 young children back in San Antonio. Tom had promised to visit them, to tell them how bravely their husband and father had died. That promise was 20 years old and still unfulfilled. "I should have been the one," Tom whispered to the darkness, his voice barely audible above the rain. "Rodriguez had everything to live for. I had nothing. Why did he have to be the hero?" The familiar weight of survivor's guilt pressed down on his chest like a physical force. He reached for the bottle of cheap whiskey he kept hidden behind a loose piece of concrete, but his shaking hand found only emptiness. He had finished the last of it that morning, and he had no money for more. Tom's decline hadn't happened overnight. After Vietnam, he had tried to build a normal life. He married Sarah, a kind nurse he met at the VA hospital. They bought a small house in Riverside, and for a while Tom thought he might actually make it. He worked construction, using his hands to build things instead of destroy them. When Lisa was born, Tom held his daughter in his arms, and made a silent promise that he would be the father Rodriguez's children would never have. But the nightmares never stopped. The sound of helicopters would send him diving for cover in grocery store aisles. He started drinking to quiet the voices of his dead friends who visited him in his sleep. At first it was just a beer or two after work. Then it became a 6-pack. Then a bottle of whiskey hidden in the garage. Sarah tried to help. She researched PTSD, went to support groups for military wives, pleaded with Tom to get professional help. But Tom was too proud, too ashamed, too convinced that he deserved his suffering. The marriage lasted 12 years. The construction job lasted 10. Tom lost both on the same day when he showed up to work drunk and fell from a second-story scaffold. Sarah packed Lisa's bags and her own, leaving behind a note that Tom still carried in his wallet. "I loved the man you were and the man you could be, but I can't watch you destroy yourself anymore. Please get help. Lisa needs her father." Tom never got help. Instead he got angrier, more isolated, more convinced that everyone was better off without him. He bounced from job to job, apartment to apartment, bottle to bottle. When Sarah died of cancer 5 years ago, Tom learned about it 3 days later from a mutual friend. He had been too drunk to attend the funeral, too ashamed to face Lisa. The descent to homelessness had been surprisingly quick after that. Without Sarah's influence, Tom lost his last apartment within 6 months. He tried staying in VA shelters, but the regimented schedule felt like prison to a man who needed alcohol to sleep without screaming. So he found this bridge. It wasn't much, but it was his. The constant rumble of traffic overhead reminded him of helicopter rotors. Sometimes he pretended he was still in the war, still had a mission, still mattered to someone. A sudden clatter of footsteps on the wet pavement above interrupted Tom's dark reverie. He looked up toward the street level, squinting through the rain. It was past midnight. Not many people walked through this part of downtown at this hour. The footsteps seemed hurried, urgent. Then Tom heard something that made his old soldier instincts kick in immediately, the sound of multiple people running, and not in a friendly way. "Please, I don't have any money," a voice called out in the distance. Tom sat up straighter, his military training overriding 20 years of alcohol-induced fog. He recognized the sound of a hunt in progress. Someone was being pursued, and from the desperation in the voice, it wasn't a game. More footsteps pounded overhead, definitely multiple people now, and their pace was accelerating. Tom heard a man's voice, closer now. "Where you going, brother? We just want to talk." The cruel laughter that followed told Tom everything he needed to know. He had heard that same tone from enemy soldiers in Vietnam, the sound of predators who had cornered their prey. Tom's body moved before his mind had fully processed the decision. Despite the arthritis in his knees and the fog of withdrawal, he pushed himself to his feet with surprising speed. 20 years of military training don't simply disappear, even when buried under decades of guilt and self-destruction. He climbed the concrete embankment that led from the underpass to street level, moving with surprising agility for a man his age. The rain immediately soaked through his jacket, but Tom barely noticed. His attention was focused entirely on the scene unfolding in the alley across the street. 5 men had surrounded a sixth figure near a chain-link fence. The men were young, maybe in their 20s, and they wore matching red bandanas. Tom recognized the colors of one of the local gangs that controlled this part of downtown. The man they had cornered was harder to make out in the darkness and rain. He appeared to be around 35, of medium height and build, with shoulder-length dark hair that was plastered to his head by the rain. He wore simple clothes, dark pants and a light-colored shirt. What struck Tom most was the man's posture. Despite being outnumbered 5-1, and clearly in mortal danger, he didn't seem afraid. He stood calmly, his hands at his sides, watching his attackers with an expression that Tom couldn't quite read. "Come on, man, we know you got something," one of the gang members was saying. "Nobody walks through our territory with empty pockets." "Check his shoes," another suggested. "Sometimes they hide money in their shoes." The man in the center of the circle spoke quietly. "I have nothing that you need, but I can offer you something you don't know you want." This response seemed to anger the gang members. One of them, apparently the leader, stepped forward and shoved the man backward against the fence. "Don't play games with us, old man. Empty your pockets now, or we'll empty them for you." Tom watched as the leader produced a knife from his jacket, a wicked-looking blade that gleamed even in the dim streetlight. The other gang members followed suit, and suddenly the lone man was facing 5 armed attackers. For a moment Tom hesitated. The rational part of his brain told him to turn around and go back to his cardboard bed. This wasn't his fight. Getting involved would likely get him killed, and who would miss one more dead homeless veteran? But then the man in the circle looked directly at him. Even from across the street, even in the rain and poor light, their eyes met with a connection that Tom felt like a physical shock. In that brief moment, Tom saw something in the stranger's eyes that he hadn't seen in 20 years, not fear, or resignation, or anger, but something else entirely. Compassion, understanding, and somehow, impossibly, recognition. The man nodded slightly, not at Tom, but to him. It was the kind of nod Tom remembered from Vietnam, the silent communication between soldiers that said, "I see you, I trust you, and I'm counting on you." Tom's decision was made before he could second-guess himself. He had failed Rodriguez, he had failed Sarah, he had failed Lisa, but he would not fail this stranger who somehow seemed to know exactly who Tom was and what he was capable of. Moving with a speed and stealth that surprised even him, Tom crossed the street and entered the alley. The gang members were so focused on their victim that they didn't notice the old homeless man approaching from behind until it was too late. Tom had been a Marine before Vietnam, and Marines never forget their training. He grabbed the nearest gang member, a skinny kid with multiple face piercings, and put him in a chokehold before the kid even realized what was happening. The knife clattered to the wet pavement as the boy went limp. "What the hell?" The leader spun around, his own knife raised. The other 3 gang members turned as well, suddenly realizing they were no longer the only predators in the alley. But what they saw didn't match their expectations. Instead of another gang member or a police officer, they were facing a grizzled old homeless man with wild gray hair and clothes that hadn't been clean in weeks. Walk away, Tom said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded men in life or death situations. Walk away now, and nobody else gets hurt. The leader laughed, but there was something uncertain in the sound. You've got to be kidding me. Old man, do you have any idea who you're messing with? Do you have any idea who you're messing with? Tom replied, and there was something in his tone that made the laughter die in the leader's throat. For the first time in 20 years, Tom Martinez felt fully alive. The fog of alcohol and depression lifted like smoke in the wind. His senses sharpened to combat readiness. He could hear each gang member's breathing, could track their movements, could calculate their likely reactions to any move he might make. Last chance, Tom said, and his voice was steady as granite. Walk away. The leader looked around at his crew, one already unconscious, the other three suddenly looking less confident. Tom could see the calculation in the young man's eyes. Was whatever they might steal from this stranger worth tangling with a crazy old man who moved like he knew how to fight? But pride and reputation are powerful forces. The leader's grip tightened on his knife. Nobody disrespects us on our own turf, he snarled. Especially not some crazy homeless drunk. The attack came fast, but not fast enough. Tom's muscle memory kicked in as the leader lunged forward with the knife. Tom sidestepped, grabbed the young man's wrist, and used his own momentum against him. The leader found himself face first against the chain-link fence, his knife arm twisted behind his back at an angle that made him scream in pain. The other two gang members rushed Tom simultaneously, but decades of training made him faster than he had any right to be at his age. He released the leader, and spun to face the new attackers. A quick jab to the solar plexus dropped the first one, gasping and retching. The second hesitated just long enough for Tom to grab him by the shirt and slam him backward into a brick wall. The entire fight lasted less than 30 seconds. Tom stood in the center of the alley, breathing hard but alert, watching as the gang members struggled to their feet. The leader was cradling his twisted arm and looking at Tom with a mixture of rage and newfound respect. This isn't over, old man, he spat as he gathered his crew. Yes, it is, Tom replied calmly, and if you're smart you'll make sure it stays over. The gang members retreated into the night, and Tom turned to check on the man he had rescued. He found himself looking into the most remarkable eyes he had ever seen. They were dark brown, almost black, but they seemed to contain depths that went far beyond their physical appearance. In those eyes Tom saw wisdom that seemed ancient, compassion that seemed infinite, and something else that made his breath catch. He saw himself, not as he was now, broken and defeated, but as he had been meant to be. Thank you, the stranger said simply. His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly despite the rain. There was an accent there, slight but unmistakable, Middle Eastern perhaps. Are you hurt? Tom asked, checking the man for injuries. No, the stranger replied, and Tom realized it was true. Despite being shoved against the fence and threatened with knives, the man didn't have so much as a scratch on him. But you are. Tom looked down at himself, surprised. During the fight, he had scraped his knuckles on the brick wall, and there was a small cut on his forearm where one of the knives had grazed him. He hadn't even felt the injuries in the heat of the moment. The stranger stepped closer, and Tom felt a strange warmth despite the cold rain. Without asking permission, the man gently took Tom's injured hand in his own. Tom was about to protest. He wasn't used to human contact, especially gentle contact, but something stopped him. The stranger's hands were warm, impossibly warm for someone who had been standing in the rain. More than that, they were soft in a way that suggested this man had never done hard physical labor, yet there were scars on the palms that Tom could feel even in the darkness. What's your name? The stranger asked, still holding Tom's hand. Tom hesitated. He hadn't told anyone his real name in years. The other homeless people called him Crazy Tom. The police knew him as just another vagrant. Tom, he said finally. Tom Martinez. The stranger smiled, and something about that smile made Tom's chest tighten with emotion he thought he had buried years ago. Hello, Tom Martinez, the stranger said, and the way he said it made Tom feel like a person again, not just a problem to be managed. I'm very glad to meet you. What's your name? Tom asked. The stranger was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider the question carefully. My friends call me many things, but you can call me Emmanuel. Tom nodded, though something about the answer felt incomplete. Emmanuel, it was a name he recognized from somewhere, but he couldn't quite place it. What were you doing out here so late? Tom asked. This isn't exactly a safe neighborhood. Emmanuel's smile widened slightly. I wasn't lost, Tom. I was looking for someone. Did you find them? Emmanuel looked directly into Tom's eyes. Yes, I did. The rain was beginning to ease, but both men were soaked through. Tom suddenly became aware of his appearance, the torn jacket, the unwashed clothes, the smell that clung to him after years of living rough. He started to step back, embarrassed, but Emmanuel didn't release his hand. Where do you live, Tom? Tom gestured vaguely toward the underpass, under the bridge. It's not much, but it keeps the rain off most of the time. May I see it? The request was so unexpected that Tom almost laughed. In 3 years of homelessness, no one had ever asked to see where he lived. Social workers had documented his living situation, police had roused him from his cardboard bed, but no one had ever asked permission to enter his space. It's pretty rough down there, Tom warned. Not exactly fit for company. I've stayed in rough places before. Emmanuel replied gently, if you don't mind the company. Tom found himself nodding before he had consciously made the decision. There was something about this man that made him want to trust, something that reminded him of the chaplain he had known in Vietnam, a man who had seemed to carry peace with him wherever he went. They made their way back across the street, and down the embankment to Tom's makeshift home. In the dim light filtering down from the streetlights above, Tom's living space looked even more pathetic than usual. A piece of cardboard served as a bed, with an old military sleeping bag that had seen better days. A plastic milk crate held his few possessions, a picture of Sarah and Lisa from happier times, his discharge papers from the army, a medal of valor he had never been able to throw away, but couldn't bear to look at. Emmanuel looked around without judgment, taking in the Spartan surroundings, with the same attention he might give to a luxury hotel room. You were a soldier, he said, noticing the sleeping bag and Tom's military bearing. Marines, then Army Special Forces in Vietnam, Tom replied automatically, then wondered why he had volunteered that information. He rarely talked about his service with anyone. You saw combat. It wasn't a question. Emmanuel somehow knew. Tom nodded. 2 tours, lost a lot of good friends over there, including one who saved your life. Tom's breath caught. How could this stranger know about Rodriguez? Tom was certain he had never mentioned it to anyone. How do you know that? Tom asked, suddenly wary. Emmanuel was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. Some stories write themselves across a man's face, Tom. You carry the look of someone who has been asking himself why he survived when others didn't. It was true, but the accuracy of the observation unsettled Tom. He had become used to being invisible, just another piece of urban debris that people stepped around without noticing. But this man saw him, really saw him, in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. His name was Michael Rodriguez. Tom found himself saying. He had a wife and 2 kids back in San Antonio. He threw himself on a grenade to save the rest of our squad. He was 23. Emmanuel nodded slowly. And you promised to visit his family. Tom stared at him. There was no way Emmanuel could know that. No way unless. Who are you? Tom asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emmanuel sat down on a concrete ledge, seemingly unbothered by the dampness and dirt. I told you, I'm someone who was looking for you. Why were you looking for me? Because you've been talking to me for 20 years, Tom. Every night when you ask why Rodriguez died instead of you. Every time you beg for forgiveness for surviving. Every time you wonder if there's any point to your life. I've been listening. Tom felt his legs go weak. He sat down heavily on his cardboard bed, staring at this stranger who somehow knew his most private thoughts, his deepest guilt, his secret conversations with ghosts and memories. That's impossible, Tom whispered. Is it? Emmanuel asked gently. Is it any more impossible than a 68-year-old homeless man single-handedly defeating 5 armed gang members to save a complete stranger? Tom had no answer for that. The fight already seemed like a dream, something that had happened to someone else. He shouldn't have been able to move that fast, react that quickly, fight that effectively. Why didn't you help Rodriguez? Tom asked suddenly, the question tearing out of him like a physical wound. If you were listening, if you cared, why didn't you save him? Emmanuel's expression grew infinitely sad. I did save him, Tom, just not in the way you think. Rodriguez isn't gone. He's more alive now than he ever was in that jungle. What does that mean? It means that death isn't the end of the story. It's just the end of one chapter, and it means that Rodriguez's sacrifice wasn't meaningless. He saved your life for a reason. What reason? Tom's voice was bitter with 20 years of accumulated pain. Look at me, look at what I've become. I've wasted every day he gave me. Emmanuel leaned forward, his dark eyes intense but filled with warmth. The reason Tom Martinez was tonight. The reason was this moment, right here, when you chose to risk your life for a stranger, rather than turn away. Rodriguez's sacrifice made tonight possible. Tom shook his head. One good deed doesn't make up for 20 years of failure. Who said anything about making up for anything? Emmanuel asked. Tom, do you think Rodriguez died hoping you would punish yourself for the rest of your life? Do you think he threw himself on that grenade so you could spend decades hating yourself? The question hit Tom like a physical blow. He had never considered it from that angle. All these years he had assumed that his guilt was appropriate, that his self-destruction was the only honest response to his unworthiness to survive when better men had died. I don't know how to live with it, Tom admitted, his voice breaking. I don't know how to wake up every morning, knowing that I'm here because he's not. Emmanuel was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with a gentleness that made Tom's chest ache with emotions he had spent decades trying to suppress. Tom, what if I told you that Rodriguez has been watching over you all these years? What if I told you that every night when you talk to him, he hears you? What if I told you that he's not disappointed in you? He's proud of what you did tonight. Tears began to flow down Tom's weathered cheeks. He couldn't remember the last time he had cried. How can you know that? He whispered. Emmanuel reached out and placed his hand on Tom's shoulder. The touch was gentle, but Tom felt a warmth spread through his entire body, a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since before Vietnam. Because I know Michael Rodriguez, Emmanuel said simply. I knew him when he was 7 years old, stealing apples from his neighbor's tree to feed his younger sister. I knew him when he was 15, working 2 jobs to help his mother pay rent. I knew him when he was 18, and decided to enlist because he believed in serving something bigger than himself. And I knew him in that moment, when he chose to give his life for his brothers. Tom was sobbing now, 20 years of suppressed grief pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. I miss him so much. I miss all of them. Why couldn't I have been the one to die? Because your story isn't finished yet, Emmanuel said. Because you still have work to do. Because the man who risked his life tonight to save a stranger is the man Rodriguez died to preserve. Through his tears, Tom looked at Emmanuel with new eyes. There was something about him, something that went beyond his uncanny knowledge of Tom's past. There was a quality of presence, as if the air itself became more peaceful when he spoke. Who are you really? Tom asked again. Emmanuel smiled, that same gentle expression that made Tom feel truly seen for the first time in decades. I think you already know, Tom. In your heart you've always known. You've just been afraid to believe it. Tom stared into Emmanuel's eyes, and in them he saw something that made his breath catch. He saw the face of every person who had ever shown him unconditional love. His mother, Rodriguez, Sarah and Lisa. But more than that, he saw something eternal, something that existed before time, and would endure long after the last star burned out. As the rain finally stopped, and the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Tom Martinez, broken veteran, failed husband and father, homeless drunk, began to understand that his story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Tom stared into Emmanuel's eyes, and in them he saw something that made his breath catch. He saw the face of every person who had ever shown him unconditional love, his mother, Rodriguez, Sarah and Lisa. But more than that, he saw something eternal, something that existed before time, and would endure long after the last star burned out. Jesus, Tom whispered, not as a curse but as a recognition. Emmanuel, Jesus, nodded slowly. Hello, Tom. I've been waiting a long time for you to be ready to see me. And as the rain finally stopped and the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Tom Martinez, broken veteran, failed husband and father, homeless drunk, fell to his knees and wept in the presence of perfect love. The tears that flowed were different from any Tom had shed in 20 years. These weren't tears of self-pity or rage or despair. These were tears of recognition, of coming home after being lost for so long that he had forgotten what home felt like. Every wall he had built around his heart seemed to crumble in the space of a heartbeat. I don't understand, Tom sobbed. Why would you let me save you? You're God. You could have stopped those men with a thought. Jesus remained seated on the concrete ledge, his presence radiating a peace that seemed to push back the darkness that had surrounded Tom's life for so long. Could I, or did I choose to let you be my hands in that moment? Tom, do you think tonight was an accident? Tom wiped his face with the back of his hand, leaving streaks in the grime that covered his cheeks. You planned this. I planned for you to have the opportunity to choose, Jesus replied. You could have stayed under this bridge, you could have told yourself it wasn't your problem, but you chose to act with courage and compassion, even though you thought you were risking your life for a stranger. But you knew I would save you. I hoped you would, Jesus corrected. I believed in the man Michael Rodriguez died for. I believed in the father Lisa still loves despite everything. I believed in the husband Sarah never stopped praying for, even after the divorce, but the choice was always yours to make. The mention of Sarah sent a fresh wave of pain through Tom's chest. Sarah's prayers? She prayed for me every single day until the day she died, Jesus said softly. Even after you stopped calling, even after you missed Lisa's graduation, her wedding, the birth of your grandchildren, Sarah never stopped believing that the man she fell in love with was still in there somewhere. Tom covered his face with his hands. I destroyed everything good in my life. I was so angry, so drunk, so lost that I pushed away everyone who tried to help me, and yet here you are, Jesus observed. Sober for the first time in years, alert, focused, capable of defeating 5 armed men to protect someone you'd never met. Tom, the man you think you lost is still there. He's been waiting for you to stop punishing him long enough to let him breathe. Tom looked up, his eyes red and swollen but clearer than they had been in decades. I've been so afraid. Afraid that if I stopped hurting, it would mean Rodriguez's death didn't matter. Afraid that if I forgave myself, I'd be dishonoring the men who didn't make it home. And what do you think now? Tom was quiet for a long moment, searching his heart for an honest answer. I think maybe the best way to honor them is to live the life they died to preserve. To be the man Rodriguez thought was worth saving. Jesus nodded approvingly. Rodriguez didn't sacrifice himself so you could spend the rest of your life in misery, Tom. He sacrificed himself so you could live, really live, not just exist, not just survive, but live with purpose and meaning and joy. I don't know how, Tom admitted. I don't know how to be that man anymore. You start with forgiveness, Jesus said, standing up and walking over to where Tom was kneeling. He placed both hands on Tom's shoulders, and Tom felt that same incredible warmth spreading through his body. You start by accepting that you are forgiven completely and unconditionally. How can you forgive what I've done? Jesus looked directly into Tom's eyes with infinite compassion. Tom, I didn't come into this world to condemn people who are already drowning in their own condemnation. I came to pull them out of the water. Do you know what I see when I look at you? Tom shook his head. I see a man who loved his fellow soldiers so much that he's spent 20 years torturing himself because he couldn't save all of them. I see a husband who loved his wife so deeply that he drove her away rather than let her continue to be hurt by his pain. I see a father who loved his daughter so completely that he disappeared from her life rather than continue to disappoint her. Tom started to protest, but Jesus held up a gentle hand. I'm not saying those were the right choices, Tom. I'm saying they came from love, not selfishness. You didn't destroy your life because you didn't care. You destroyed it because you cared too much and didn't know how to handle the weight of that care. But the damage is done, Tom said. Sarah is dead. Lisa probably hates me. I'm a 68-year-old homeless man with no skills, no money, no prospects. Jesus smiled, and in that smile Tom saw hope. The kind of redemption I specialize in takes broken things and makes them beautiful again. It writes the most amazing stories on the most damaged pages. As if to punctuate his words, the sun crested the horizon, sending the first rays of dawn streaming under the bridge. The light fell directly on Tom's face, warming his skin and chasing away the chill of the night. What happens now? Tom asked. Now you get up, Jesus said, extending his hand to help Tom to his feet. Now you start living like a man who has been forgiven and given a second chance. Tom took the offered hand and stood, surprised by how steady he felt. The shaking in his hands was gone. The fog that had clouded his mind for years seemed to have lifted. He felt more alert and alive than he had since before Vietnam. There's something else, Jesus said, his expression growing more serious. Your story is about to intersect with other stories in ways you can't imagine. The choice you made tonight has set things in motion. What do you mean? I mean that acts of selfless love create ripples. The courage you showed tonight will inspire courage in others. You saved more than just one person in that alley, Tom. You saved yourself, and in saving yourself, you've become capable of saving others. Tom felt a flutter of excitement about the future. What am I supposed to do? How can I help people when I don't even have a place to live? You'll figure it out as you go, Jesus said with a smile. But I'll give you a hint. It starts with the family you think you've lost forever. Lisa has been praying for you too, Tom. She named her son Michael, after the soldier who saved her father's life. She tells the boy stories about his grandfather, the war hero. Tom's knees nearly buckled. She knows about Rodriguez. Sarah told her everything before she died. About Vietnam, about the survivor's guilt, about the man you were before the war damaged you. Lisa understands more than you think, and she's been hoping for 20 years that her father would find his way back to himself. But I don't know where she lives. I don't know how to contact her. Jesus reached into his robe and pulled out something that made Tom's heart stop, a photograph. But not just any photograph. It was a recent picture of a woman who looked exactly like Sarah had at 35, standing next to a tall man with kind eyes and a young boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. This is Lisa now, Jesus said, handing Tom the photograph. She lives in San Diego. She's a nurse, like her mother was. She married a good man named David who teaches middle school, and this, he pointed to the boy in the picture, is your grandson Michael. He's 8 years old, and he loves baseball and asks questions about his grandfather Tom all the time. Tom's hands trembled as he held the photograph. The little boy had Sarah's eyes and Tom's stubborn chin. Lisa looked happy, peaceful, successful, everything Tom had hoped she would become despite his failures as a father. How? Tom whispered. I told you, Jesus said gently. Some stories are about to intersect. Lisa has been volunteering at a homeless shelter in San Diego every Tuesday night for the past 3 years. She tells people it's because she wants to help, but the truth is she's been hoping that one day her father might walk through those doors. She's been looking for me, not actively searching but hoping, praying, believing that the man who taught her to ride a bicycle and read her bedtime stories was still out there somewhere, waiting for the right moment to come home. Tom stared at the photograph through tears. But what if she doesn't want to see me? What if I've hurt her too much? What if I disappoint her again? What if you don't? Jesus asked. What if this is the moment everything changes? What if the courage you showed tonight in saving a stranger was preparation for the much greater courage it will take to save your own family? Tom looked up from the photograph to find Jesus watching him with infinite patience. I'm scared. Of course you are. But Tom, remember who you are. You're a man who just defeated 5 armed gang members to protect someone you'd never met. You're a Marine who survived 2 tours in Vietnam. You're a father who loved his daughter so much that he was willing to break his own heart to keep from breaking hers. You have more courage than you know. What do I do? How do I even begin? Jesus smiled. You begin by taking a shower. Despite everything, Tom found himself laughing. It was a sound he hadn't heard from himself in years. A shower. You can't very well show up at Lisa's house looking like you've been living under a bridge for 3 years, Jesus said with a grin. We need to get you cleaned up, get you some decent clothes and help you remember how to be Tom Martinez the father instead of crazy Tom the homeless veteran. But I don't have money for a hotel, or clothes, or anything. Jesus reached into his robe again, and pulled out a wallet that definitely hadn't been there before. He handed it to Tom, who opened it to find several $100s in cash, along with something that made his heart skip, a driver's license with his name, and a San Diego address. How is this possible? Tom breathed. The same way it was possible for you to defeat 5 armed men tonight, Jesus replied. The same way it's possible for a broken man to be made whole again. Some things don't require explanation, Tom. They just require faith. Tom stared at the wallet, then at the photograph of his family, then at Jesus. You're really giving me a second chance. I'm giving you what I give everyone who asks for it, Jesus said. Forgiveness, hope, and the opportunity to become who you were always meant to be. But what about Rodriguez? What about all the men who died? How do I honor their memory? Jesus placed his hand on Tom's shoulder again. You honor them by living, Tom, by being the kind of man they would be proud to call brother. By using the life they help preserve to make the world a little bit better. Tom nodded, feeling something he hadn't experienced in decades. Purpose. Not just the desire to survive another day, but an actual reason to live, to grow, to become better than he was. There's a YMCA 6 blocks from here, Jesus said. They have showers and a clothing donation center. The attendant's name is Marcus, and he's a veteran too. Iraq War. When you tell him you need help getting cleaned up to see your family, he'll understand. How do you know all this? Jesus' smile was mysterious. I know Marcus too. I've been working on his story for a while now. He's been waiting for someone to help, someone who would understand what it's like to come home from war carrying invisible wounds. Tom was beginning to understand that his story was connected to other stories in ways he had never imagined. And after I get cleaned up, after you get cleaned up, you get on a bus to San Diego. You go to the Mercy House homeless shelter on 5th Avenue. You ask for Lisa Martinez Thompson, and you tell her that her father has come home. What if she turns me away? She won't, Jesus said with absolute certainty. But even if she did, even if this reunion doesn't go exactly as you hope, it would still be worth trying. Because the man who tries to reconnect with his daughter is already a different man than the one who abandoned her. Tom felt a warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling he gradually recognized as hope. For 20 years, he had lived without hope, convinced that his story was over, that he had nothing left to offer the world. But now, standing in the presence of perfect love, he began to see that his story was just beginning. What about you? Tom asked. Will I see you again? Jesus' expression grew tender. You'll see me every time you choose love over fear, Tom. Every time you help someone who can't help themselves. Every time you forgive someone who doesn't deserve it. Every time you offer hope to someone who has given up. That's not really an answer. It's the only answer that matters, Jesus replied. I'm not going anywhere, Tom. I'll be with you when you knock on Lisa's door. I'll be with you when you meet your grandson for the first time. I'll be with you when you figure out what the rest of your life is supposed to look like. Tom nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he understood. What he did understand was that everything had changed. The man who had been planning to drink himself to death under a bridge was now preparing to reunite with the family he thought he had lost forever. There's one more thing, Jesus said, reaching into his robe one final time. He pulled out a small wooden cross, simple and unadorned, and pressed it into Tom's palm. This belonged to Rodriguez. Tom's breath caught. The cross was warm in his palm, worn smooth by years of handling. How do you have this? Rodriguez carried it through every battle, including his last one. He wanted you to have it. Tom closed his fist around the cross, feeling its weight, not just the physical weight of the wood, but the spiritual weight of connection, of love that transcends death, of sacrifice that gives meaning to survival. He forgives me. He never blamed you, Tom. None of them did. The only person who needed to forgive Tom Martinez was Tom Martinez. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, other homeless people began to stir in the makeshift camps scattered throughout the underpass. Tom could hear the sounds of the city waking up, traffic increasing on the interstate above, the distant sound of sirens, the rumble of garbage trucks beginning their daily rounds. I should go, Tom said, though he was reluctant to leave Jesus' presence. Yes, you should, Jesus agreed. Marcus will be at the YMCA in an hour. The bus to San Diego leaves at 2 this afternoon. Lisa will be at the shelter tonight from 6 to 10. Tom memorized the details, then looked one more time at the photograph of his family. His grandson Michael was grinning at the camera, missing his 2 front teeth, wearing a Little League uniform. Tom wondered what position he played, what his favorite subject in school was, whether he had nightmares like his grandfather once did. Jesus, Tom said, and the name felt natural on his lips now. Thank you, for everything, for not giving up on me. Jesus smiled, and in that smile was all the love Tom had been searching for in the bottom of bottles for 20 years. Thank you for not giving up on yourself. Thank you for choosing to fight for a stranger instead of walking away. Thank you for being brave enough to come home. Tom gathered his few possessions, the photograph, the wallet, Rodriguez's cross, and the Medal of Valor he had never been able to throw away. Everything else he left behind, the cardboard bed, the empty bottles, the years of self-imposed exile from hope and love and family. As he climbed the embankment toward street level, Tom turned back one more time. Jesus was still there sitting on the concrete ledge, but he seemed somehow different, brighter, more present, as if the growing daylight was revealing his true nature, rather than obscuring it. I'll make you proud, Tom called down. You already have, Jesus replied. Now go make yourself proud. Tom Martinez walked away from the bridge that had been his home for 3 years, but he wasn't walking away alone. With every step he could feel Rodriguez's cross in his pocket, Sarah's love in his heart, and Lisa's hope drawing him forward. Most of all he could feel Jesus's presence beside him, not as a vision or a memory, but as a constant companion on the long journey home. The YMCA was exactly where Jesus had said it would be, and Marcus was exactly who Jesus had said he would be, a veteran who understood the invisible wounds of war and the long road back to civilian life. Marcus didn't ask questions when Tom explained that he needed to get cleaned up to see his family. He just showed Tom to the showers, found him clean clothes that actually fit, and gave him a cup of coffee while he waited for the bus. "You look different," Marcus said as Tom prepared to leave. "Like a man who's found his way home." "I think I have," Tom replied. "For the first time in 20 years I think I finally have." The bus ride to San Diego passed in a blur of nervous anticipation and growing excitement. Tom spent the time studying the photograph of his family, practicing what he would say to Lisa, imagining what it would be like to hold his grandson for the first time. When the bus pulled into the San Diego terminal, Tom felt Rodriguez's cross in his pocket and whispered a prayer of gratitude for second chances and the mysterious ways that love finds a way to heal even the deepest wounds. He was going home. Tom stood outside the Mercy House homeless shelter on 5th Avenue in San Diego, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone inside could hear it. The clean clothes Marcus had found for him, dark jeans, a simple blue button-down shirt and worn but polished boots, made him feel human again for the first time in years. He had even gotten a haircut and shaved off the scraggly beard that had hidden his face for so long. But none of that mattered now as he stared at the glass doors of the building where his daughter worked, where she had been hoping and praying for his return for 3 years. In his pocket, Rodriguez's cross felt warm against his palm. In his wallet, the photograph of Lisa and her family reminded him why he was here. Through the windows, he could see people moving around inside, volunteers serving dinner to homeless men and women who looked disturbingly like the man he had been just 12 hours ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was about to reunite with his daughter in the very place that served people like him, people who had fallen through the cracks of society. Tom took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The smell hit him first, not the harsh disinfectant of most shelters, but something warmer. Coffee, fresh bread, and something else he couldn't identify. Hope, maybe. The main room was large and welcoming, with round tables where people sat eating dinner and talking quietly. Volunteers moved between the tables, refilling coffee cups and offering second helpings with genuine smiles. "Can I help you?" A young man with kind eyes approached him. He wore a name tag that read Volunteer Day. Tom's breath caught. David. Lisa's husband, his son-in-law, whom he had never met. "I'm looking for Lisa Martinez Thompson," Tom managed to say. David studied Tom's face for a moment, and something flickered in his expression, not recognition exactly, but something close to it. "May I ask who's looking for her?" Tom's throat felt dry as sandpaper. Tell her, tell her, tell her it's her father." David's eyes widened, and for a moment he just stood there, processing what he had heard. Then without a word, he turned and walked quickly toward the back of the room where a woman was organizing food donations. Tom watched as David approached her, watched as he whispered something in her ear, watched as she froze mid-motion and slowly turned toward the entrance where Tom stood. Even from across the room, even though 20 years had passed since he had last seen her, Tom knew his daughter immediately. She had Sarah's grace and beauty, but she had Tom's eyes, the same gray-green eyes that had once been sharp enough to spot enemy movement from 500 yards away. For a long moment, father and daughter simply stared at each other across the crowded room. Tom saw her face cycle through emotions: shock, disbelief, hope, fear, and something else that made his chest tighten with gratitude. Love. Despite everything, despite the years of absence and broken promises, he could see love in his daughter's eyes. Lisa said something to the volunteer next to her, handed off the box she was holding, and began walking toward Tom. Her steps were measured, careful, but determined. The entire room seemed to fade away as she approached, until there was nothing in Tom's universe except his daughter and the 20 years of regret he carried in his heart. She stopped just a few feet away from him, close enough that he could see the tears gathering in her eyes, close enough that he could see Sarah's features reflected in her face. "Dad," she whispered, as if she couldn't quite believe he was real. "Hello, Lisa," Tom said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I have no right to be here, no right to ask for anything from you, but His words were cut off as Lisa closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him. For a moment, Tom was too stunned to respond. Then slowly, carefully, as if he were afraid she might disappear, he hugged his daughter for the first time in 20 years. They stood there in the middle of the homeless shelter, both of them crying, both of them holding on as if they could make up for 2 decades of lost embraces in a single moment. Around them, the noise of the shelter faded to a whisper as other volunteers and clients alike recognized that they were witnessing something sacred. "I thought you were dead," Lisa sobbed against his chest. "I hired private investigators. I called every hospital and shelter from LA to San Francisco. I thought I'd never see you again." "I'm sorry," Tom whispered into her hair, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, something floral that reminded him of Sarah. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I'm sorry for everything." They held each other for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Finally, Lisa pulled back enough to look at her father's face, her hands reaching up to cup his cheeks as if she needed to touch him to believe he was really there. "You look different," she said, studying his features. "Older, obviously, but there's something else. Your eyes. They're not," she paused, searching for the right word. "They're not empty anymore." Tom smiled through his tears. "A lot has changed since yesterday, sweetheart. More than you can imagine. Are you okay? Are you healthy? Where have you been living?" The questions tumbled out of her in a rush, 20 years worth of worry and love and desperate need to know that her father was all right. Tom felt his heart break all over again as he realized how much pain his absence had caused her. "I'm okay now," he said. "I'm more than okay. But Lisa, there's so much I need to tell you, so much I need to explain." "Dad." Tom turned at the sound of a different voice, and his heart stopped altogether. Standing next to David was a boy who looked exactly like Tom had at the same age, same stubborn chin, same unruly brown hair, same curious gray-green eyes. He wore a baseball uniform with grass stains on the knees, and held a glove in one hand. "Michael," Lisa said softly, "this is your grandfather, the one I told you about." Tom's knees nearly gave out. His grandson, Rodriguez's namesake. The boy he had never met but had thought about every single day since learning of his existence just hours ago. Michael stepped forward with the fearless curiosity of 8-year-old boys everywhere. "Are you really my grandpa Tom? The one who was a soldier?" Tom knelt down so he was at eye level with the boy, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch his grandson's face. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I am. Mom says you were a hero in the war. She says you saved people." Tom glanced up at Lisa, who was watching the interaction with tears streaming down her face. She had told their son he was a hero. Despite everything Tom had done wrong, despite all the ways he had failed as a father, she had chosen to preserve his memory as something good in their son's mind. "I tried to be," Tom told Michael, "but mostly I was just a soldier doing his job, trying to get home to the people he loved." Michael studied his grandfather with the serious expression of a child trying to understand adult complexities. "Mom says you got hurt in the war. Not on your body, but in your heart. Is that why you went away?" The question was so innocent, so direct, that Tom felt his breath catch. How do you explain PTSD and survivor's guilt and decades of self-destruction to an 8-year-old? "Yes," Tom said simply. "My heart got very hurt, and I didn't know how to fix it. So I went away because I thought that would keep me from hurting the people I loved most. But that just hurt us more," Michael said with the brutal honesty of childhood. Tom nodded, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. "Yes, it did. And I'm sorrier about that than I can ever tell you." Michael was quiet for a moment, then he did something that broke Tom's heart and healed it simultaneously. He stepped forward and hugged his grandfather, wrapping his small arms around Tom's neck and holding tight. "I'm glad you came back, Grandpa Tom," he whispered. "I've been praying for you to come home." Tom held his grandson and wept, for all the birthdays he had missed, all the baseball games he hadn't attended, all the bedtime stories he hadn't read. But mostly he wept with gratitude for this moment, for the impossible grace of a second chance he didn't deserve but had been given anyway. "I'm home now," Tom whispered back. "I'm never leaving again." Over the next several hours Tom told his family everything. Not all of it, some details were too painful, too raw for an 8-year-old to hear, but enough. He told them about Vietnam and Rodriguez and the 20 years of guilt that had nearly destroyed him. He told them about living under the bridge and the gang fight in the alley. But when he came to the part about Emmanuel, about Jesus, he hesitated. "How do you tell your family that you met the Son of God under a bridge at 3 in the morning? There was a man," Tom said carefully, "someone I saved from those gang members. He helped me understand some things about myself, about forgiveness, about coming home. Lisa leaned forward. What kind of things? Tom looked at his daughter, at her husband, who had welcomed him without question, at his grandson, who was coloring a picture of a soldier and a little boy playing catch. He helped me understand that Rodriguez didn't die so I could spend the rest of my life punishing myself. He died so I could live, really live. This man sounds wise, David said. Wiser than anyone I've ever met, Tom replied. He told me things about myself that no stranger could possibly know. He knew about Rodriguez, about your mother, about… Tom looked at Lisa. He knew you had been looking for me. Lisa's eyes widened. How could he know that? Tom smiled. I'm still figuring that out myself, but I think sometimes help comes from places we don't expect, in ways we can't explain. As the evening wore on, Tom learned about the life his daughter had built despite his absence. She had become a nurse, just like Sarah. She had married David, a middle school teacher who coached Little League and believed in second chances. They had built a good life together, filled with the kind of love and stability Tom had always wanted to provide but never knew how. Mom never gave up hope that you'd come back, Lisa told him as they sat together watching Michael demonstrate his batting stance. Even after the divorce, even after years of no contact, she never stopped believing that the man she fell in love with was still in there somewhere. Your mother was a better person than I deserved, Tom said. She loved you, Lisa said simply, flaws and all. That's what love does. It sees the best in people even when they can't see it in themselves. Is that why you became a nurse? To help people the way she helped me? Lisa nodded. And why I volunteer here? Mom always said that everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves a chance to start over. She would have loved knowing that you found your way to the very place where I've been hoping to see you. As the shelter began to close for the evening, Tom faced the question he had been dreading. Where would he go now? He had enough money for a hotel room for a few nights, but then what? He was 68 years old with no job, no permanent address, no plan beyond this reunion. Dad, Lisa said, as if reading his thoughts, come home with us tonight. We have a guest room, and Michael has been begging to show you his baseball card collection. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing, David interrupted. You're family, and family doesn't impose, they belong. Tom felt that familiar warmth spreading through his chest, the same feeling he had experienced in Jesus' presence. Love, acceptance, home. As they drove through the streets of San Diego toward Lisa's house, Tom watched his grandson chattering excitedly about his baseball team and his friends at school. In the rearview mirror, he caught Lisa's eyes and saw Sarah looking back at him, the same expression of hope and love he had seen on the day Lisa was born. Thank you, he mouthed to his daughter. Thank you for coming home, she mouthed back. Lisa and David's house was everything Tom had hoped his daughter would have: comfortable, welcoming, filled with photographs and children's artwork and the accumulated treasures of a life well lived. Michael gave him the full tour, proudly showing off his bedroom, with its baseball posters and bookshelves full of stories about heroes and adventures. This is my favorite, Michael said, pulling out a worn photo album. Mom made it for me about our family. Tom's breath caught as Michael opened the album. There, on the first page, was a picture he hadn't seen in 20 years. Tom in his army dress uniform on his wedding day, looking young and proud and full of hope as he gazed at Sarah in her white dress. Mom says you were the most handsome soldier she ever saw, Michael said, matter-of-factly. Tom turned the pages slowly, seeing his life through his daughter's eyes. Pictures of him holding baby Lisa, teaching her to walk, reading her bedtime stories. Pictures of family barbecues and Christmas mornings and lazy Sunday afternoons, all the moments that had felt ordinary at the time but now seemed precious beyond measure. She kept all of this? Mom said memories were the one thing no one could take away from us, Lisa explained, sitting down next to them on Michael's bed. She said that even when people make mistakes, even when they go away, the love doesn't disappear, it just waits. Tom closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of undeserved grace. Sarah had preserved his memory not as the broken man he had become, but as the loving father he had been. She had given their daughter, and now their grandson, a legacy of love instead of abandonment. I wish I could thank her, Tom whispered. You can, Lisa said softly, by being the grandfather to Michael that you couldn't be as a father to me, by living the rest of your life in a way that honors the love she never stopped having for you. That night, Tom lay in the guest room of his daughter's house, staring at the ceiling and marveling at the impossible series of events that had brought him here. 24 hours ago, he had been a homeless drunk living under a bridge, talking to ghosts and planning his own destruction. Now he was surrounded by family, by love, by hope for a future he had never imagined possible. He pulled Rodriguez's cross from his pocket and held it up in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Thank you, brother," he whispered. "Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for giving me the chance to come home." As he drifted off to sleep, Tom could have sworn he heard a familiar voice on the wind. "Well done, good and faithful servant. Your story is just beginning." Over the following weeks, Tom began to rebuild his life with the same methodical precision he had once used to survive in combat. He found a small apartment near Lisa's house, close enough to be part of his grandson's daily life, but far enough to give the family their privacy. He got a job doing maintenance at the YMCA, where Marcus worked, finding purpose in keeping the facility clean and safe for other veterans seeking help. But his real work began at the Mercy House shelter, where he started volunteering alongside Lisa and David. Tom's story, carefully edited for appropriate audiences, became a beacon of hope for other homeless veterans struggling with their own demons. He never mentioned Jesus directly, but he talked about redemption, about second chances, about the possibility that even the most broken life could be repaired. What changed? A grizzled Vietnam vet named Eddie asked him one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "You got that look, like a man who's been somewhere and come back different." Tom thought about the question as he wiped down tables. "I met someone who reminded me who I used to be," he said finally. "Someone who helped me understand that my mistakes didn't have to define my future." Sounds like some kind of counselor or something. Tom smiled. Something like that. 3 months after that rainy night under the bridge, Tom stood in the dugout of Michael's Little League game, cheering as his grandson rounded the bases after hitting his first home run of the season. In the stands, Lisa and David beamed with pride, and Tom felt his chest swell with the kind of joy he had forgotten was possible. After the game, as they walked to the car with Michael chattering excitedly about his hit, Lisa slipped her arm through her father's. "Dad," she said quietly, "I want you to know how proud Mom would be, how proud I am. You could have given up under that bridge, but instead you found your way back to us." Tom squeezed his daughter's arm, thinking about that mysterious stranger who had appeared in an alley at the exact moment when Tom was ready to choose courage over fear, love over self-destruction. "I had help," he said simply. That evening, as Tom tucked Michael into bed and listened to the boy's prayers, which now included gratitude for Grandpa Tom coming home, he realized that his story had become part of something larger. His redemption hadn't just healed his own life, it had restored hope to his family, inspired other veterans at the shelter, and created ripples of love that would continue long after he was gone. Later, as he sat on his small apartment balcony looking up at the stars, Tom pulled out Rodriguez's cross and the photograph of his family. Both had become touchstones, reminders of sacrifice and love, of the connections that bind us together across time and space and even death. "Thank you," he whispered into the night, to Rodriguez, to Sarah, to Jesus, to all the people who had shaped his story. "Thank you for not giving up on me." A gentle breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the scent of ocean salt and blooming jasmine, and in that breeze, Tom could have sworn he heard a voice he recognized, full of infinite love and boundless grace. "Thank you for not giving up on yourself. Thank you for coming home." Tom Martinez closed his eyes and smiled, knowing with absolute certainty that his story, once broken and seemingly beyond repair, had been transformed into something beautiful, not because he deserved it, but because love has the power to redeem even the most shattered lives, to write hope on the most damaged pages, to bring the dead back to life. He was home, finally, completely, eternally home. And his story would continue to ripple outward, touching other lives, inspiring other comebacks, proving again and again that no one is too far gone, no story is too broken, and no heart is beyond the reach of perfect love. The homeless veteran who had saved a stranger in an alley had discovered that the stranger had been saving him all along, and in learning to receive grace, Tom had learned to give it to himself, to others, and to a world that desperately needed to believe in second chances. His greatest adventure wasn't behind him in the jungles of Vietnam, or under the bridges of Los Angeles. It was just beginning, one act of love at a time. The end. This incredible story of Tom Martinez reminds us that redemption can come from the most unexpected places. When Tom risked his life to save a stranger in that dark alley, he had no idea he was about to encounter the very person who could heal his deepest wounds. For 20 years Tom carried the weight of survivor's guilt, believing he was unworthy of the life Michael Rodriguez had died to preserve. He punished himself through homelessness, addiction, and isolation, pushing away everyone who loved him. But in one moment of selfless courage, everything changed. What strikes me most about this story is how Tom's act of saving Jesus became the catalyst for Jesus saving Tom. Sometimes we think we're helping others, only to discover they were helping us all along. Tom's willingness to fight for a stranger revealed the hero that had been buried under decades of pain, the same hero Rodriguez had died to save. The reunion with Lisa and meeting his grandson Michael shows us that it's never too late for families to heal. Lisa had spent years volunteering at that homeless shelter, unconsciously hoping her father might walk through those doors. Love doesn't disappear just because someone goes away. It waits, it hopes, it believes in second chances. Tom's transformation from crazy Tom living under a bridge to a beloved grandfather coaching Little League proves that our darkest chapters don't have to define our entire story. With forgiveness, both divine and human, even the most broken life can be beautifully restored. His work at the Veterans Shelter now helps other wounded warriors find their way home, creating ripples of redemption that will touch countless lives. What touched your heart most about Tom's story? Was it his courage in the alley, the moment he recognized Jesus, or his emotional reunion with his family? Have you ever experienced a moment when helping someone else ended up transforming your own life? Share your thoughts below. Your story might inspire someone who needs hope today.